Welcome to Lady Audacity. I'm Alex.
And I'm Meredith, and welcome to our July Patreon episode. So excited to get into Princess Anne. Alex has been burning the midnight oil. Trust me, I know. I go to bed at like 9:15 like a baby. I knock myself out, and Alex is texting me at all hours like a college kid. No, it's okay. I'm always like, I'm like, what am I gonna wake up to? And she is on it. It's going to be so much fun. We love doing these deep dives, and we appreciate all of the new Patreons supporting us. It makes a big difference. It hopefully might mean we'll get an editor and producer soon. I am just manifesting that out into the ether. And in
Yes.
terms of next month's Patreon, we haven't decided who it is yet. I have a couple of ideas since it will be my turn kind of taking lead, but we will
Yes.
make sure to put out a poll so that you can vote on who you want because you voted for this month's. This is all you,
Yep.
babies. It's all
This is all
you.
you guys.
Yeah, you guys go. So, you know what? Without further ado, no one needs to hear from me. Let's get into it. Our Taylor Swift eras themed series
Yes.
this time on Princess Anne. Alex, my love, take it away.
So for Princess Anne, I couldn't decide on a song because I think you'll see why Princess Anne and Taylor Swift just like don't quite jive. But I can say I decided to make her era the 1989 era. And I think you guys
Ooh.
will see why. And yes, maybe I'm harping too much on the fact that she refuses to call herself a feminist and she's one of those. But it's just, you'll see why she's relating to the 1989 era of Taylor Swift. So,
Can
with
you
further
can you
ado,
remind me can you remind me what songs are on 1989? I get them all confused.
so that's like Shake It Off.
Oh.
We Are Never Getting Back Together, I feel like isn't on that album actually. I feel like that's on the album before. Remember, you guys, I am not a Swiftie. I'm just not good at this. But like I remember Shake It Off and then the one where she's like in Africa.
Yeah, it's Shake
Which
It
one?
Off, Blank Space,
Yes, Blank Space. Blank Space.
right? Yeah, Style,
Yes.
Bad Blood, Wildest Dreams, Out of the Woods, New Romantics. I just looked that up. That is Wikipedia. That's not Meredith's brain.
And I think, yeah, I mean, especially like Blank Space, that is so Anne, or at least how she is described by so many journalists and journalists that are her friends. So we're going to throw back to her early childhood. Princess Anne was born on August 15th, 1950. And when we're talking a lot right now about how stereotyping the royal children can really affect them early on. You really see this with Charles and Anne especially because by 5 she was already being described as a tomboy. Like there's this really interesting article from 1955 I found, and I don't know, let me read some quotes and hear your thoughts about this, Meredith.
Okay.
They go on to describe how she plays with toy soldiers and trains and like how she's always trying to keep up with her brother. But don't worry, and I quote, but the children fortunately developed a typical boy and girl preferences, and Princess Anne dainty individuality has been increasingly pronounced in recent months. I mean, it's very interesting. It's like she's a tomboy and it's cute, but don't worry, guys, she's still feminine. Our little 5-year-old is still a dainty little girl, and it's just becoming more and more pronounced. Don't worry. So I think, really talking about the times and what she was growing up in. And I think that's very interesting knowing Anne today, because I think calling her dainty, she would probably slap you.
She doesn't come across as dainty to me. This woman wore her full, like, Napoleon it's not Napoleon, I know it, but that full regalia to the coronation in lieu of, a dress. I don't know if dainty is what I'd call her, but it's very interesting the way we have to keep these gendered ideas. Like, yeah, she loves to play
Yes,
with her brother and the toy soldiers, but don't worry, she's always a lady.
exactly. And, when she becomes a teenager, that tug of war gets more prickly. But before we get there, another big event actually happened before 5 and she's being labeled a tomboy already was actually, of course, 1952 when her grandfather passed away, the king, and her mother became the Queen of England, which means like Charles very quickly they didn't see their parents anymore. Although Brian Huey, and I'm going to mention him a lot throughout this episode because he pretty much like made documentaries with Anne, was very close to her for like decades and writes a lot about her. He's written a couple biographies about her, and I read one of them. But he goes on to say, though, like, while they didn't see their parents for weeks and even months at a time, it wasn't really quite different to what they were already used to. Like, there was this whole story how, like, Queen Elizabeth had Anne, and, like, not an hour later, she was asking for, like, the papers from the government to start citing and looking up.
Dang, take your maternity leave.
Like, zero. I will say she is her parents' children, and you will see that throughout.
She's not even in the mesh underpants at that point that they give you after having a child
Right?
and, like, the diaper yet. I mean, she has not even been stitched up.
What
Calm
is
down, lady.
happening? Also, not really relevant, but I need to throw this out there. Did you know that she had like someone from the government came to witness her give birth to Charles? That was the last time that ever happened because King, her father was like, you know what? I think that's enough of that. I think you guys know by now, like, we're not going to switch out babies and stuff. So we don't need any more people in the room with their legs spread and giving birth as is.
Oh my god, and it's funny because I was actually thinking about that, like, when did that practice stop? When they used to basically birth in the hall and everyone was just, like, sitting around sipping
Literally.
tea, watching the action. Um, I was
It
really
was
wondering when that
Charles.
ended. It was Charles,
And
okay, so
luckily, it was only like down to like one government person, but still weird. I'm glad that got
God,
cut off.
weird.
Right. So again, their parents are now queen and prince, and they're barely seeing them. And immediately they get their nannies. The first one was Helen Lightbody, who was nicknamed No Nonsense Lightbody. She resigned in 1956. It doesn't seem there was much drama there, other than she was just like old and ready to move on. Then it was Miss Mabel, who came in to be their main nanny, and she was the second in command to Lightbody. And she has stuck with this family until she like died. She was the nanny for Charles and Andrew and Edward, and then she
Oh,
even delayed her retirement in 1977 to take care of Anne's first baby, Peter. Yeah, so to say they were close to her is an understatement. I think surrogate mom, if they ever wanted to openly say, if they could openly say that, they would say that. I mean, so obviously she was close to both of them, and Charles actually described her as a haven of security, the great haven. And it's so funny throughout of how they talk about their nannies, you can really start seeing the differences of Charles and Anne, and how Charles is this kind of like romantic, you know what I mean? And Anne, when she talks about her nanny, she just talks a lot about how she taught her to save money. She's like, this is a quote to Hui in her book is, I was brought up by a Scottish nanny to be careful with money, and I am by nature someone who hates waste. And like
she's the
every time she
person
talks
that
about
uses the butt of the bread or the heel of the bread. You know she's that person that's like, "It's perfectly good for a little Jemmy penny," or whatever they call those things.
okay. And she loves that she can fit into her clothes of when she was in her 30s. Like literally from the 80s to like 2010, they're always talking about how she can still fit into her size 10 clothes. And I'm like, okay, we get it. We get it.
Yay. We're
Right?
past that.
We get
Bodies are
it.
supposed to
Right?
change, it's okay.
It's very much good. She's not like other girls. She doesn't need new clothes. She even does her own hair. Did you see her hands? She doesn't get them manicured. They're just naturally nice. Like literally, this is why she got 1989. Okay. But so, and I think I had to make a little side note about this because when looking up their early childhood and the fact that like Queen was absent and so was Prince Philip, you see a lot of people, especially if you look at like recent articles, trying to kind of make up for that. Because I think in modern times, reading that, you're kind of like you neglected your child. It sounds like, even though that was completely normal for aristos, and I should say that, it's not like Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are doing anything unique by barely seeing their children. I'm sure that's still pretty relevant to Aristo society today. But there's this quote from the list, and it says, "This isn't to say that Queen Elizabeth neglected her children." And I always love a moment to call out Lizzie and how she's like morally corrupt and really does a well done finesse because
I love how you
like
call her Lizzie when you're getting shady.
when we're getting sassy, like when Lizzie and I are fighting, I call her Lizzie.
We beefin'.
We are beefing right now, and like she went down as the country's grandma, and she had the nerve to shake her son's hand after not seeing him for 5 months in front of the entire press. Okay,
That was so
like I
cold.
was like, it was so bad. It was so bad. And the thing is with Anne is so interesting because like I feel like you barely hear about her true feelings about that, unlike Charles, you know? But that is a finesse she also didn't make up. It sounds like Queen Victoria was really the one who started that. I mean, we all now know now that Queen Victoria did not like her children. She didn't like children, period, let alone her own. But I heard like they said that she would often though bring across that image. Like in all of her
Yes.
portraits, it was just her and her children. It was never her with the nannies and the, you know, like
So that is from that was we were talking about that. That's from the book Running the Family Firm by Laura Clancy,
yes,
and this idea that to paint Queen Victoria in this sort of domesticated,
yes,
circumstance, despite the fact that obviously there's so many people laboring to make it look like that, and the way in which the Cambridges sort of do a similar thing with almost playing middle class with these very informal looking, but obviously posed and curated family pictures, Kate taking some
exactly.
of the photos. It gives a sense of intimacy and normalcy.
And hiding the nanny away.
Mhm.
Like, you know, the whales do that a lot. They really like it's almost like she's a close family friend that helps out a lot rather than like the nanny that is there full time. And hey, I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Oh,
I
no.
would love a nanny.
Oh
I
my
would
god.
love a nanny. Please, okay? You can afford help. God, get it.
God bless
Get
you.
it. I know, right? So again, it's well documented how Charles dealt with this. We know it was hard. He really did not get along with his father well. I mean, very much going into those toxic masculinity, he was too sensitive and so on. But in all of the press, I mean, I went back. It's always like described like, oh, Anne though, like she totally was used to it because she got the same like tough love. But they say because she was an extrovert, she was able to handle it well. Mind you, Anne is not an extrovert. Okay?
I was
Like
about to
all of the
say.
descriptions about her, she's aloof, if anything. She's does not like strangers. Okay. Like if she wasn't a royal, I'm sure she would make sure she had a job where there was absolutely no customer service involved. Okay,
Wow,
like
am I Anne, is Anne me? I just it sounds like she
right?
was just more in the mold of her parents than Charles was. She was more adept
Oh, totally.
personality-wise, temperament-wise to take on this kind of
Exactly.
responsibility and, kinda
Stiff
just
upper
roll with
lip.
it. Yes, there we go.
And the thing is, like, I kind of love that for her that we don't know how she truly feels about the relationship she had with her parents because she's such a private person. It's obvious she doesn't want us to know, and I love that we don't know because that's such an intimate and personal thing. And I mean, and of course, though, part of me does wonder if also she doesn't speak out because she's so much of that kind of like last generation of such those traditional stiff
Yes.
upper lip mystery. There's so much mystery around her still. Like I talk about mystery around Kate, no, Anne, we really don't know much about that woman at all. And that's how she likes it. And good for her. So I can't help but wonder though if that's like, you know, it's almost like nature, was it nature, environment versus nature
Nature versus
or
nurture.
nurture. Thank you. Nature versus nurture. It's like if you weren't brought up in this environment, would you feel more open to speaking kind of like how this affected you? Or is this just, hey, you're not the type of person to speak about your private matters out loud?
It's a good
But
question.
you know, it's because when she does, and there's very little moment she does, like there's this one interview with Hoey in regards to the claim she always has to be right and is inflexible because as you will see literally from her teen years and on, Anne has never been called a bully, but if this was Meghan Markle, holy shit, because the way she is described of being rude, she can never ever be wrong. And if you say like something opposing her opinion, she gets pissed off quickly. It's all over. Every single thing from the media to staff talking about her. Okay. But in talking about that, asking about it, like as being inflexible, she makes a comment, pretty much scoffs at that. And she's like, I've been a professional fence sitter all of my life. And it's like little comments like that. I'm like, ooh, Anne, boo boo. I am
Anne said
sorry.
Anne said, "I've got a blank space baby, and I'll write your
Okay,
name."
okay. Right? Like, don't you dare try to call me inflexible when I've had to sit here and be, okay, the side character my entire life, right? So, and speaking of that, I feel like there's times they talk about where you're like, wow, this must have been one of those fundamental moments in her childhood where she was like, I'm inferior. And I don't know if you wanted to read this, maybe, Meredith.
I'd be happy to. Miss Catherine Peebles was engaged as a governess to Charles, with whom she quickly became so besotted that when Anne was sent along for lessons, she practically ignored. Miss Peebles was totally possessive about Charles. He could do no wrong in her eyes, and she hated leaving him for a moment, even when he was spending time with his mother. It was not a healthy relationship, and Charles became equally dependent on her. When it was decided to send him away to preparatory school at the age of 7, Miss Peebles was distraught. She wept for days when two 5-year old girls, Susan Babington Smith and Caroline Hamilton, both granddaughters of senior courtiers, were brought into the palace to share Anne's lessons. There was never any great enthusiasm from any of those involved. Yikes.
Okay, first off, I'm scared for Charles. Like, did anyone sound the alarm and be like, maybe she has a very weird and toxic attachment to a child? How old is this woman? Okay, and it doesn't go on from here. I cut it off, but she ended up like I think dying like 5 or so years later in her room, and they didn't find her for a couple days, and they still don't know how she died. That's all I'm gonna say. We will explore that later for Charles episode. Don't worry, I already bookmarked it. This whole entire episode.
You know
Okay.
what's funny to me about Charles,
Yeah,
and I'm kind of seeing this similarity almost with his uncle King Edward. Wait, his
yeah,
uncle? No, his great uncle. Yes, his great uncle.
yes,
And that is the need for almost kind of mothering from people, like, and maybe perhaps,
yes.
and especially for Edwards, for his actual partners. But I do wonder. I'm like, God, I wonder how that
Gosh.
plays out, perhaps in Charles's relationship with Camilla. Just a thought I had. Continue.
Well, yeah. So obviously, this trauma that I'm sure Charles, I wonder to this day, even knows he went through because this is just absolutely not okay. But again, I can't help but think this is one of those moments where Anne was like also traumatized because, wow, I don't matter. I am inferior to my brother because that is how she was being treated. And it's just you see these little building blocks always being created throughout her life. Like even when she moved on to her secondary school, it was like, oh yeah, because the press gave she got a little bit of crap. And I always felt bad because it should have been more towards her mother than Anne, who was like 12 years old at the time.
Ugh.
But it was pretty much known that she didn't have to go through the same like paperwork and testing and meetings that all the other students did. They just got her grades, and the headmaster had a meeting with the queen and she was in, and hey, are we shocked? My mother's the Queen of England, and I got into the school that I wanted to get into. And also, fun fact about Princess Anne, like her and Harry remind me of one another a lot in little ways like this, but she didn't go on to go to university. She didn't want to. She got very average grades. She is like Harry, she's just not that's just not her place. She didn't like it, so she moved on from that. And that's when we started seeing her getting into horses and then why she started working very quickly for the firm. So I want to move on a bit, of course, to her personality. Anne is fun in that way. So, like, she is consistently described as anything from hardworking, cold, relentlessly competitive, difficult, loyal, witty, and aloof. And I will say, I watched some of her interviews, and she is witty. Like when she finally gets to her joke or she finally has that little moment, she does a little smirk like her mom does and just have this it's just so cute. I don't know, you don't expect it from her and I do love that about her. But a really big thing about her is her attitude problem. And at first, when I went into researching this, I definitely had this like, well, she's also female growing up during this time period. She's going to get a lot more shit than the others. But the more I started looking into it, I'm kind of like, this is kind of appropriate. For one, she was just very
Oh.
unprofessional throughout the 70s when she was technically working. So, and it's not just the media with this. Actually, in her 60th coverage, Hoey writes about this. And one, he says, her small team is very loyal, though one former assistant did describe her as a bossy bitch.
Which is amazing because today
Yeah.
you'd be like, "Bossy bitch, yes, get your back." You know what I mean? That's almost a
Right?
positive.
And I almost feel like in a way they're saying this in a like maybe they're just scared. Honestly, I feel like people are kind
Or
of scared of the
honestly,
gun.
it's also British people, so this could be kind of a sarcastic compliment. You know what I mean? Like
Well, that's what
they
I'm
can be
saying.
rough.
Exactly, and I feel like by this time, though, especially because this article I was quoting from with the bossy bitch, that was in 2010. I feel like a lot of the attitudes from the royals, it's like, oh, but they're royals. That's what royals are. They're stubborn. They abuse their power to get what they want, even if it's just getting out of a speeding ticket. It's kind of like you're used to that. So it's like, yeah, she's mean, but like, she's like bossy bitch. Like it's kind of like a fun thing. And, it's very interesting in hindsight with what has happened to Megan because I kept looking for her to be called a bully because sometimes it sounds like she can be, but not once. No, not one time for her.
Very telling.
Okay. Right? So for one, she is her father's daughter. In fact, they actually had like a joint controversy together in the 1970 Oceania tour that the whole family did.
What a family bonding experience. You're a
Right.
joint, controversy.
Right. So it was actually during a walkabout in Australia. And so Anne cursed during a windy walkabout, saying this bloody wind, right? Sir William, who had a 30-year career with the Royals, actually spoke to it was for like a documentary in 2015. He was actually the former private secretary to the Queen too. And he said when dealing with this, because for one, Prince Philip had was greeted by a Greek man, and they said he said like a Greek curse word back to the man, but that's highly debated. Phil was like, I didn't. And people were like, people in the crowd were like, yeah, he did.
Kinda
Personally, I
sounds like
believe
a
the crowd.
Philip gaffe. It sounds like a typical Philip
Exactly.
gaffe.
Very Philip. Okay. But when talking about Aunt, he said she had been having difficulty with her hat in the wind, and there was unfortunately no doubt at all she had used the word by no means unusually for her. And like for people, non UK people, bloody is pretty much the equivalent of fuck.
Oh,
So, yes, that is literally like fuck. Okay. So on the job, she said this fucking wind. You're gonna get some slack for that even in 2023 if you're on the job. Okay. And Anne really needed this image overhaul in the 80s. And not just because she was already like in the midst of her struggle love and everything with her with her first husband and so on, but it's because the 70s again just weren't great times. She was obviously not prepared for what they were going to be doing because people forget in the 70s is actually when they begin to do walkabouts. So that's when they begin to do the walkabouts we know today, the shaking hands and talking to people. So it's very foreign to them. And again, Anne seems to be genuinely someone who doesn't like touch unless she really, really is comfortable and likes you. And I respect that. And I must say that's got to be a weird gray line of like, this is your job, but also your personal boundaries. There's a quote from who we talked about her 60th birthday. Like, she just has her core group of friends, but even them, they know not to be too familiar. And I can't help but think that's like, she's not a don't give me a hug. I don't know you like that, even if I've known you for 30 years. Like, but so some of the really big hiccups in the 70s for her was obviously the Oceania tour. You had the Australia portion where she just didn't do great, and she was snapping at photographers. They kept saying like they would ask her questions, and she just like, "You're a nuisance." Like literally, just "You're a nuisance. Don't talk to me." Which is you got to have some sort of finesse. But there was the Charles and Anne's infamous trip to DC in July 1970, which she really struggled with. And mind you, this was like directly after they did the Oceania tour, so this is a bit of a brutal schedule. So after the Iraqi send off in Australia, Andy kept to that stubborn streak and stepped off the plane in DC. And well, here we go. From the moment, right? This is a quote from a Daily Mail article talking about that moment. I think from like 2019, this article. From the moment she stepped onto the lawn and commented, I didn't know they made so many cameras. She made no effort to conceal a mood of incredulity and vague discomfort. And again, it's not like bad, but it's also not great because professionalism. You know what I mean? Just And then you have here, this is a quote from a 2019 documentary about Anne. Joy Billington, who was a journalist in Washington, D.C. at the time of Anne and Charles' 1970 U.S. visit, slammed Anne's behavior toward the press. She said she was very bad tempered, very sulky. She really didn't want to be there, and that was the impression one had. Then there was Helen Thomas, very respected journalist, said, Princess Anne, what do you think of the Washington Monument? And instead of saying very tall, she could have answered in two simple words. She said, I don't do interviews. And I kind of want to be like, bad bitch, it's a bad bitch. But also, like, again, baby, you're at work. You're at work and you're being rude. This is like literally your job.
But isn't it also funny that a big thing that's kind of been, especially thrown recently with Harry and Meghan is this idea of like, this is
Mhm.
part of your job, get used to it, deal with it. But it
Exactly.
seems like it's something that a lot of royals in the past have struggled with as well.
Exactly, and, like, in other coverage of this, they're like, "She made Charles look wonderful because at least he would smile at us and wave," which is also too why I, like, laugh about things because 'cause I've always said Charles has an it factor. Yes, it was overshadowed by Diana's because hers was just mega wide, you know what I
Yo,
mean?
you are blinded by your little zaddy crush that you sometimes have on Charles.
Shh, you totally called me out. Okay, don't call me out like that. I haven't even out loud called him Zaddy, and you called me out because yeah, he sometimes is. Okay, okay.
I'm not
I
gonna
like
judge you.
tall, skinny white kids sometimes. So, and again, you guys, I'm gonna post this interview, but it's with Michael Parkinson's in 1983, and it's when she's back in Australia. I think it was for the BBC. It's a sit-down interview, and it's really good to see Anne's personality, but also she talks a lot about this trip. And again, you can tell this is her kind of doing that media overhaul. But a lot of it, she says, she's like, there was no training for that. She's like, this was the first time we're ever doing walkabouts. She's like, there's no princess handbook they gave us. You're just thrown into it and I had to go with it. And she says too of feeling bad because she's like, I know no one was there to see me. You know, they're there to see my mother and they're there to see Charles. So the whole time I'm thinking, stay out of the way pretty much. Don't get in the way of this camera. Don't get in the way of this camera. But then I'm just called cold and rude. So again, it's like those small moments where you can see that maybe that spare angst come through of like, I know you're not here to see me. So of course I'm going to try to hide and get away. And then now I'm getting crap because people are mad about this. And of course, two things can be true at once. I think Anne doesn't like the press and she has attitude with them. And they did taunt her a lot through, you know, the 70s and teenage years. At points, there's articles calling her chubby. And then, like, she would lose weight and they'd be like, oh, Princess Anne looking not flubby anymore. Our beautiful princess is back, you know? And it's sad because you can tell she really struggled with not being people's stereotypical princess, you know? And I think too with really coming across with her struggling not being the fairy tale princess because, you know, being obviously like a tomboy and stuff like that, but I think a lot of it was she didn't have that it factor. And that's not me making a personal dig at Anne. Not everyone has that. And Anne didn't want to have that. It's very obvious. Honestly, looking at Anne's personality, I like it. And I love her humor. Her dry, witty humor is so fun. But also in that interview with Michael Parkinson, sometimes you can really see that not it factor there because sometimes it's just hard listening to her because she has a very monotone voice and she talks very slowly and there'll be these big pauses in between. And she's, you know, and it's just taking forever to get to the point. But then when she does, it's like fun and how she tells it is hilarious and the audience is laughing and you're laughing, but you're also like, yeah, it's lacking sometimes that charisma, especially that mainstream charisma that people need to latch onto, you know.
God,
And I
you're
also
right,
think
though. I'm thinking about the sparkle, and you're right,
yes.
like, Diana had the sparkle, Kate
Mhm.
has the sparkle,
You go.
especially just in person. Meghan obviously has the sparkle, like,
Harry, you know what I
you're
mean?
right, you either have that thing that just draws people to you or you don't, and there is something about her that feels a little more, especially in later years, like a little more school marm, you know?
Exactly, like, she doesn't want and, like, I can only imagine too following up Princess Margaret as a spare had to be daunting just for anyone, but let alone when you're Princess Anne and you're just the polar opposite, you know what I mean? You're not into the glitz and glam like that, your coping mechanisms are just not as, like, unfortunately for that time, you know, quote, unquote, "glamorous" with the cigarettes and the drinking and the party, it's like, that just wasn't how Anne was. Like, they actually talk about how you cannot find a story about, like, her you know, extracurricular affairs and who she was sleeping with, and good for her. But it's like she kept that shit under lock and key. And I also think because she terrified people a little bit, like Philip did, and good for her, you know? But, and also part of that too, when you really look at the difference of these other people we're calling charismatic too, is like touch. Diana was hugging people. Even Charles was dancing with people and you know what I mean? Like having these moments. And obviously you have Harry and Meghan and Kate who do big bracing hugs. And she refused to step into that. Again, she doesn't like she would barely start shaking hands in the 80s, which was like, you know, even her pay like they used to complain her charities that she wasn't being as personal as they wanted her to be. And Hoey expresses this in 2010 in his Express article. If she appears to go out of her way to antagonize the media, it is because she refuses to accommodate them by doing stunts, as she calls them. She won't pick up babies or kiss handicapped children, even if by doing so she would receive favorable coverage. Like her father, the Duke of Edinburgh, she believes it is not necessary to be liked to be respected. And
Okay.
okay, and I just feel like that's very easy for someone who is born into like hereditary privilege and riches to say that. But hey, do you?
Yeah.
Do you? And also, can I just say it also feels a little bit like a dig at Diana? And it's very interesting
Mm.
because those digs with Diana began pretty quickly. And I think this also has to do with the overhaul in the 1980s because what also came in the 80s? Diana. Literally, I think it was 1980, they announced their relationship. In 1981, they're engaged and married. There's this like really interesting article from 1984, and this is I think it was 1978 or maybe 1980 actually. She started to the Save the Children fund trips or be the Patreon of that, and she's you know she still is to this day. And she started doing trips for them, and in those trips, she's obviously in Africa. She's around poor children. You know, this white lady is in just like regular clothes, not hugging these children, but standing next to them and looking
White
compassionate.
savior. You're giving white savior.
Exactly. It's people were loving it and suddenly was like, "Oh, maybe she's not a bitch," you know? So, there's this article and it's called Princess Angelic. It's about her trip. And just a couple blurbs from it. It has, "Make no mistake about it, this is not a member of the royal family making smooth progress in comfortable limousine amid bowing officials." And then there's another section, "Accommodation will be Spartan, notably a night stay at a field station, little more than a bare concrete building. For too long, Anne had the image of being the bossy, arrogant, and spoilt royal whom some frankly thought abused her position, but a change in public attitude was detectable in the winter of 1982 when she made the first of Save the Children fun trips." Again, I'm sure the Save the Fun trips helped, but I can't help but also think this was Diana too. There was someone else to pile on. Diana is like fun and she's beautiful and she's pretty, but it's also so fun to bring the it girl down, you know? And then you have, you know, Anne, who's humble and quiet and doesn't complain and doesn't make a show out of things. And it's kind of like Kate and Megan
Yep, I
so
was just thinking
easily,
that. Yeah,
they're
and it's
just
almost like
turning
the
it.
person that's already in the household, when someone new comes in, there's this feeling like you have to live up or compete or
Mhm.
kind of it's the way we kinda see more of, like, the PDA Kate stuff because
Exactly.
we saw more of Megan PDA, and it's kind of trying to,
Yes. You
latch
know,
onto those
why
things that make them popular.
or like with Kate, like Megan immediately launching these projects that were really successful. And it was like, well, Kate, you know, she's not one to just hurry up and rush things. She's going to take her time, even
Yeah.
if it doesn't look good to the public. You know, it's that. And that I feel like is a lot what we saw with Anne and kind of like Diana. Even though it's not as explicit, you can tell that's part of it. You know, Diana's out here kissing children and babies in her, you know, high heels and her Catherine Walker, but Anne's pretty much in just sleeping on floors in Africa. So it was really weird. And for like Hoey's book, he goes around a lot of the places that she likes to visit, and one of them is the Falklands and a favorite spot of Princess Anne's. And he quotes a civilian when asking around about Anne, and they say, "The Argies got Diana, we got Anne. There's no doubt in royal terms, we got the best of the bargain." So
Oh,
again, like he was just like, okay. And I'm just going to round out Princess Anne with the press, and I think being the spare with a couple more quotes from an interview pretty much with Howie for his book.
I think it's Huey. I'm
And I
just gonna guess it's Huey. I like that you make him out to be
okay,
a hoe, but I think
Ho.
it's I'm gonna guess it's Huey. I'm gonna guess there are
Yes.
no hoes in this house. I'm going to guess it's Huey.
Huey, Brian Howie Huey. No.
Okay, okay, hoe. Okay, keep going.
Let's go, Ho. Okay. Then again, Huey writes, and this was 1990 for this main biography I'm talking about. And like, I almost feel like it's too aggressive to even call like her complaints like tepid, because they're so passive. But like, this is an example. He says, "What does she feel about the image she has had for years as a member of the royal family who never really fits in? I've never been what some people think a princess should be, wearing a crown and a long dress. And I was always the tail end Charlie and grew up being used to the fact. In my case, having a lot to do with horses has meant getting used to disappointments. You spend years trying to achieve something, and just when you think you are there, you are let down. But you have to learn to get on with life, which is full of disappointments." Like, ma'am, I'm gonna go cry now.
Oh,
Okay, you're
okay,
sad.
shit, that
I'm
was a
sad.
downer.
Right? And then he has this one when it's he goes over pretty much what people have said about her, like, your insatiable appetite for winning, you're too competitive, no one can be wrong. And he says, "How does she regard herself? I was not in the least competitive in the early days. I had been brought up not to be. You must also remember that girls did not have as many career opportunities then as they do today." That I found interesting. There's these like little moments where she brings up, "I was raised, I can't be like this," because obviously gender stereotypes. And you have these little moments, for example, when she wanted to change, she became the Lady of Garter in 1994, but she wanted to be a knight. And that's because the difference of being a lady or a knight is rank and importance. So Anne looked at everyone, was pretty much like, "I'm Barbie, they're just kins. I will not be outranked by these bitches." So she told her mom, aka the queen, who was obviously like, "I got you, girl." And I mean, also the head of the armed forces, and she became the Knight of Garter. And she was the first female to become the Knight of Garter, which is really cool. But it's really funny when you look back at that time because how it's like described is not like this like feminist moment, or even just like she wants to be treated like the boys. Hui actually, in a book, when he talks about it, this is, I think, a really good briefing of what everyone was kind of saying then. When the queen elevated her daughter to be a Lady of Garter in 1994, the princess was entitled to affix the letters LG after her name. Apparently, this was not to her liking, for she asked her majesty and was granted permission to use the letters KG instead. KG signifies a Knight of the Garter, and she now has the queen's consent to use those letters, which in fact makes her the only female KG in the world. Like, why does it sound like she was complaining about the initials? Like, it just
Yeah.
seems so juvenile, like her complaint was that she didn't like these initials. They didn't look good.
Anne feels like kind of like a first wave feminist, but only for herself. You know what I mean? Because
Yes.
I wonder how many people
Yes.
after her, how many women have become Lady of the Garter. Like, it wasn't like she was trying to dismantle
The
that
system.
system and everyone
Yeah.
should be Knights of the Garter. This is unfair. It was
Yeah.
only for herself.
Exactly. And I feel like that's what a lot of her quote unquote feminism is, and why she doesn't like it, because she just wants to be a part of the good old boys club. And I also think she's like, "That's your business, not mine." This is someone who does believe in hereditary titles and stuff like that. And the funny thing is, I think the only reason she didn't give her kids one, and again, this is just my personal opinion, is because I think that again is maybe um evidence of what it did to her being the spare. She's like, these titles did come with a lot, and then they came with very little at the same time.
Her kids
So
could be
I'm
shady though. Zara has used her name and her position for all these kind of brand
shady
endorsements and
as
stuff.
fuck.
Shady.
Oh, they're both
Shady.
so shady. And the funny thing is, they always said Anne was like using her power to get what she wanted. I mean, you guys, Anne was like the first royal, I think, to have like a criminal record because of all of her speeding tickets.
Oh
The
shit.
girl, she
She's got a
loves
lead
to
foot.
speed. I think she like, oh, what happened? There was some sort of oh, and then she got in big trouble. She actually had to go to court because her dog bit someone in the park. So yeah, Anna's like had a multiple run-in with the
Anna's a
law.
threat. Anna's a threat to
Okay.
society.
She be driving. She be just around that whip. Okay.
They
Fast and
see
the
me
Furious.
rolling.
I
They
wonder if
hate
Fast and the
when
Furious is her favorite movie. If I could ever ask Anna a question, I'd be like, "Is Fast and the Furious your favorite movie?" I'm just
I don't know what you're talking about.
saying.
Please leave. I'm just kidding.
I hate you. Thank you. But So anyways, we have this KG title. And the thing is, it's just funny because in 2021, there's this headline, and this is what you see now anytime it's referred to. It's Princess Anne put her foot down to receive same title and status as older brother Charles. Princess Anne insisted to be given the same title as her older brother Prince Charles when she was made a member of the Order of Garter. So you see this like feminist, oh yeah, she's gonna be the same as her brother, but then it was like, oh, she just didn't like those initials, guys. and
Guys.
we and she has made it very clear. I think it was in 2021 with her Vanity Fair interview with Katie Nicole. She asked if she was a feminist and she just shrugged her shoulders and was like, I want everyone to be able to be successful.
I love that.
1989,
It's
Taylor
giving
Swift.
it's giving I don't see color.
Exactly. It was so weird. And she just, and then like they go on to list how many organizations she works with that pushed for like, females and STEM and stuff like that afterwards. And it's like, cool, that's great. But then why does she think she's not a feminist? And this was like the same interview where she pretty much said if it's like broke, don't fix it, when talking about the Rhoda and kind of insinuating the stuff going on with Meghan and Harry. And that was my first sour taste with her. I was just like, you, like,
Yeah, I
scoff
mean,
at the idea of being a feminist,
she's still a white woman from,
right?
literally the definition of privileged. Okay, I need to
Definition.
know though, can we talk about the husbands? I am, like, dying
Let's
to
talk
get into
about
her
the
love life.
husband. Okay, yeah, so Prince Anne's love life, again, like her personality, is hard to dig out stuff on. Like, again, I don't know if she had people signing NDAs. It's giving Beyonce, honestly. Like Beyonce and Jay-Z. Like, NDAs are being signed because no one will talk about what they've done with her. And the funny thing is, there's this one quote. It's again Huey, love him. Okay, Howie, love you. You my hoe. No, but he's like interviewing like the sailors and stuff she's worked with and being the commander or whatever and whatever. And they've always like, and one of them says, off the record, won't give his name. He's like, people don't usually say anything because we can't get past the pricklies. It just
Oh.
cracked me up. I
But
was like, yeah, and
know what's interesting about Anne is the way she almost follows in her Aunt Margaret's footsteps because she gets, like, really infatuated with that equestrian. I think his name is Robert
yes.
Mead, and he's, like, 12 years her senior. At least she's
Oh my
20,
gosh.
at least she's 20.
Yes, and that was yeah, like for because there was a while where it was just like at least the press was like, is it going to be this guy? Is it going to be this guy? Is it going to be this guy? And a lot of the big contenders were equestrians, and they're always like 10 plus years older. Yeah, it was pretty much Mead was like a big time in the running, but that kind of cut off when she saw Mark Phillips. It sounds like she was just like, at least I don't know if in love, but it sounds like there was a lot of in lust from
Yeah, and
like the moment they
I
saw
think
one
part of
another.
it too is that Philip, her father, was really not down with this 12-year age gap, and I think maybe eventually that sort of sunk in, maybe perhaps the way it did for Margaret that marrying a divorcee who, wasn't of
Yes.
that world was maybe perhaps not a good idea.
And remember, like, being accepted by her parents was everything, so if her dad was like, "Nah," it wasn't gonna happen, you know? I mean, Andrew Parker Boyles, that's part of the reason why he got left
Did you
off is
just call
because he
him
was
Boyles?
Catholic.
That is so shady. I
I
like
know I
that.
did.
You totally
I
did that on I
did.
know you did that on purpose
I'm
too.
being shady. I don't like
Don't
him.
blame that on dyslexia, my friend. I'm just kidding.
That was pure
Appropriate.
shade.
That
Pure
was
shade,
appropriate.
okay?
Continue.
So, yeah, he was cut off because he was Catholic. It's just so funny looking back at this time how particular everything was. But we get our guy, Mark Phillips. And funny enough, like, he was a commoner, but from what I've seen, that wasn't really an issue for anyone. I think because he was so highly respected, he was a captain and so on, it was okay. And people always said, like, again, Anne's temperamental, and they would always laugh because they said Mark was just so chill to the point, like, when Anne would be freaking out about something, he would just laugh until she would start laughing with him. So it's really cute, They had their fun, and then they didn't, and then they did not.
But
So they
Captain Mark Phillips is the father of her 2 children, right? Peter and
Yeah, and
Zara?
that is the father. Yeah, her and Tim never had, their own children. He is the stepdad to Peter and Zara. So they had
Got it.
those. And the funny things about the parenting with that I found really interesting. She has said that, like, when talking about her upbringing and stuff and her parents being gone, saying, like, that's just part of the business. It's fine. I had great nannies. And that's what my children are used to too. And they're preparing for that. So it's interesting that she did continue that with her own children. She was always traveling, she was always out, and they were mostly raised by the nannies in the early years, for sure. And obviously, she's really close to them now. So, hey, it works for them. So, their relationship, again, I just can't help wonder if it was more and less than anything else.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because it sounds like they were separated, it sounds like in the 90s before they're officially divorced in 92, which when everyone was getting divorced. So luckily for Anne, like her divorce just kind of got stuffed down there because you've got Princess Diana and Fergie. You know what I mean? There was a lot more going
3
on.
of the 4 children become separated and embroiled in scandal, and the Windsor house burns in 92. It's a bad
Exactly.
year.
It was like, and you good, boo. Also, fun fact about Anne too: the wedding with Mark Phillips. That was the first time there was a royal wedding that was televised. Very interesting on
Really?
that one.
I didn't
Yep,
know
and just
that.
like she was the first woman to not give titles to her children. And, the rumor's always been that the queen, like, begged her to for, like, years, but she was always just like, "It's not going to
She's an
happen."
influencer.
She's an influencer, okay? And she did not get shit from the media, which I find very interesting because I honestly expected a little bit of shit, but everyone was just like, she don't want. And again, it was humble Queen Anne. Humble Queen Anne doesn't want to give her children titles. She wants them to, like, grow up and be hard workers, which is just hilarious to think about a Nepo baby of that extreme. Just because they didn't have titles would not grow up spoiled. Whatever, whatever, whatever. Funny enough, Bedell Smith actually writes they had separated 3 years earlier after persistent reports that both had been unfaithful. In Anne's case, with among others, Andrew Parker Bowles.
Well, girl, you just threw that out there too. Wait, I
I
thought
literally did that. I
Andrew
was just looking at Meredith.
wait, I thought Andrew happened before Captain Phillips.
So yeah, they happened before Captain Phillips. He was one of, like, the kind of like, is it gonna be him? Is it gonna be him?
Just to
Guys,
paint
that
a
was the
picture
guy.
though, just to paint a picture, you have Charles, getting with Camilla. Camilla's also getting with her on and off boyfriend, Andrew. And Andrew's also getting with Princess
Yes.
Anne. It is gross up in there.
And that's what's funny because when The Crown came out, they tried to be like, "Oh, they made it more dramatic." Like, when they all dated, it didn't overlap. Like, sure, when they originally dated, he was not with Camila. But if the rumors are true, when they were sleeping together when she was still married, that means his wife was sleeping with her. But it's just like, yikes.
Yikes.
Like, this is giving Jersey Shore. Okay, this is even like Bravo drama. This is
This is
giving Jersey
Vanderpump,
Shore. This is Vanderpump. Oh my
right?
god. Or
You know?
what's the one on the water? What's the one on the water?
Oh, it's
Charter.
like oh, below deck.
Below. This is below deck drama. This is
You're
below deck
right.
drama
Actually,
for
that's a
sure.
better
Actually,
analogy. So, okay, so she's sleeping around on her
she's sleeping
husband and
around.
her husband sleeping
Supposedly
around
sleeping
on
on
her.
her. And then we have our Tim come in. And now Tim originally started with the family. He was obviously Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, and he served in the Royal Navy. And then actually in 1986, he became the Equerry.
No, equerry.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I
No,
should
you
have.
got it right. No, we don't even have to pause.
So in 1986, he became the equerry for the Queen, and that's when he met Princess Anne
Oh
officially.
my god, he is okay, Princess Anne is Princess Margaret. Everyone is
Yeah,
getting with these equerries.
right.
Is that why they take, like, the job? They're like, "I'm gonna be getting some princess." I almost just made a very naughty alliteration. I almost just said princess pussy, and that was really gross. I'm sorry, this is for Patreon. This is what you get on Patreon.
We can do it. We can do
You're
it. It's funny.
you're welcome, and also apologies.
It's funny. And this one wasn't gross. There was no grooming involved
Wait, it
and
wasn't
nothing
gross?
inappropriate in those terms. So, well, I mean, like, maybe there's an affair, but honestly, it just sounds like they were both just done with it and for 3 years hanging on because they had to. Like, I
Mm.
wouldn't be surprised if Anne was like, you know what, let's divorce now since things are burning down. Everyone else is divorcing. This
Literally
sounds
burning
good.
down.
Like, literally. So there seems to be an overlap, but it's never officially admitted that there is between Timothy and Mark. But we can all say what we want about that overlap because they are still together to this day. And I actually wanted to read an article from that time when they announced that they were getting married. Because remember, with Mark, it was like a whole huge wedding. It's the first televised wedding. With Tim, they went to Scotland, which I love because it's getting my Bridgerton feels. They went to like Scotland to go get hitched really quickly. So like I think it was pretty much because like they didn't want to embarrass the Queen of getting married by the Church of England, type of thing.
Well, also, they got married the same year she got divorced, so
Again, we know the 80s was the rehaul and it was of her public image and it was doing really well, but like make no mistake, it was so prickly. And the fact that Princess Anne dared to get divorced and then remarried, well, it's caused some trouble. So there's this article, and it's from 92. It says, Princess Anne, change your attitude. The danger will come later on when he realizes, this is talking about Timothy, he realizes that his wife is not bothering with her appearance. Yet, for his sake, she should make the effort when they entertain anyone of importance to him in his naval position. As for Prince Charles turning up in skirts, Scotland, so he wears skirts, he should have had his bagpipes with him. And the other royals looked as if they had no interest in the wedding whatsoever, and no dress sense at all, merely saying, to hell with all this. Anyhow, worse is to come for Charles and Andrew. I don't think the age difference matters, but more women will make eyes at Tim than men will make eyes at Anne.
shit.
Mrs. Irene Drennan Feather Curley. I hope I butchered her name because damn, that was
Me
bitchy.
too. Also, she refers to Charles in a skirt. He's wearing a kilt. I am not gonna say that they are not cosplaying Scotland, which famously,
Yeah.
yeah,
But right, it's just like really mean. And I mean, again, there's so much going on within the royal fold at this time. So I feel like this is probably a really good sense of the jabs that everyone was taking at the royal family. Because I can only imagine it's kind of nice to see these people who think they have this like moral hierarchy crumbling. I mean, divorces.
the
How dare
scandal.
you guys? And I mean, affairs. Everyone's clearly also having affairs now, too. That's huge, for this to be so open. So, but I hate that it's on Anne and it's just all saying pretty much that like she's ugly and she should have dressed better. And look, that's not my favorite Anne look. but but I would never say she's not attractive or that like she needs to worry about the eyes being made at Tim. Which
Or that
also
she's reduced to her looks, or that the only reason Tim
exactly.
married her is because of her looks.
Which it's clearly not that. And Tim is just as quiet and aloof as Anne. It's very
Perfect.
sweet. We know nothing about that man, and she loves it, and he seems to love it. And I love that they're still together. Like, genuinely, congrats on them. I do wish, though, Anne would stop doing interviews.
Probably
like,
time.
right. I find it so funny that like she's the person they put out there for these interviews to kind of get goodwill towards the royals. And mind you, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I think people obviously like her, especially royalists. But outside of that, it's cringe. Like the most recent one when she's talking about like slavery and reparations, and she's like, "Well, there's still slavery today." You're like, "What are you gonna do?" It's just kind of like, no. You guys, this needs to be her last year talking
Yikes.
because this is not going to reflect well on you later on. But yeah, I'll just say Princess Anne is a really fun search. She's lived a very interesting life. I do think she's rude. I do think she's entitled. But I also think she seems very like just sweet, super fun. And if I wouldn't cry around her humor, because also one of the things talked about in the book a lot is that when she starts making fun of you, that means she likes you. Anne is mean. I know I would be crying over the thing she would be, the jokes made at my expense. Okay. Like, yeah, it wouldn't vibe well. We would not
Serving
vibe.
savage burns.
Okay.
Even,
I'm an
like, I mean,
emotional Scorpio.
even just, like, just briefly, because I know this is, gone long, but even her, like, apparently the allegations around her attempted kidnapping is just kinda
Yes.
like, "I'm not going with you." Do you wanna give,
And
like, the broad strokes of the kidnapping?
oh,
Because I
yeah,
feel like
I
it's the thing that
totally
it's the thing that people most know about Princess Anne, so I think it's okay just to give a brief overview, and maybe if people want, we can do a longer video on Instagram or TikTok about it, but maybe just give the broad
Yes.
strokes and some of the not the highlights, but of this wild and wacky kidnapping attempt.
So yeah, this occurred on March 20th, 1974. This all happened, I think, was like a man who was unemployed, he was angry, and his name was Ian Ball, an unemployed laborer from North London, and he tried kidnapping Princess Anne. It was around 8 o'clock. They were coming back from a charity film screening, and she was only 4 months into her marriage with Mark. So they're coming back from the screening. They're just in a regular car. Her lady in waiting is sitting across from her when this guy comes out, and I guess like he rips open the door, right? And I'm gonna read a little bit from this article from the
Yeah, so he
Smithsonian.
blocks off the car and comes out, and then so first yeah, and he shoots the chauffeur or the body like, someone gets shot, and then he
The
gets to the
bodyguard gets
door.
shot 4 times.
There's a lot of
4
people that get
times.
shot in this situation. Nobody dies, thank God, but a
Yeah,
lot of people
it's
get shot.
crazy. It was like
But
almost
you're
like
right.
a
He
dozen,
he
like 3 or 4 people get shot and multiple
yeah,
times.
and he opens the door.
So yeah, he opens the door to get to her, and it's so funny. So he tries to get her out, and she's like pretty much like, "No, it's not happening." And he's like tugging at her, and I guess he'd ripped her blue dress, and her only quote after that was just like, "I was upset." She's like, "But most of all, I was angry because I looked down and he ripped my favorite new blue dress, and this was a blue dress that I was going to wear on my honeymoon, and now it's ruined, and I have to get a new blue dress now." Like this is literally her whole spiel. And I'm like, wonderful. It's like giving the same vibes of when I think it was Charles in Australia when that like gunman tried to go on stage to get to him, and like the gunman gets tackled, and Charles is literally just like fixing his
Ew.
tie and his cufflinks and looking at the guy like, what is this peasant doing? Like
Get out of
the
here.
vibes are immaculate when people are trying to assassinate these guys. I must say, immaculate vibes. He said, no. It's just giving swag.
Thank you, next. So, yeah, so he tries to pull her out, and then it's a weird skirmish because at some point, doesn't he comes around the other side, or he's on that side, and somehow she manages to open the door, fall out of the car to get him distracted, and then she
Yeah.
pops back in the car and slams the door.
Well, and I honestly, so I just have to say, thank goodness that this guy did not plan all of this. This is obviously sad, but I am going to say thank goodness for Anne's safety. Sounds like he suffered from really bad mental illness. And he just may have been on something when it happened. So he was just not planning this, and he didn't have the means to, I think, even mentally to pull it off. And again, thank goodness, because it was such a sloppy attempt. But also at the same time, I have to say there was 4 people around to protect her, and they almost all got shot, and he still got to Anne. I would have been like, "We need to tighten up security,
Well,
guys."
it's that. So, like, yeah, the chauffeur gets shot, the bodyguard gets shot, and then, like, a
4
policeman nearby
times.
gets shot, and then this, like,
Shot.
boxer. They're so lucky.
Yeah.
The 6'2" boxer happens to, like, get on the scene, and, I mean, eventually he is apprehended, and no one is injured no one dies of this, but yeah, like, a
Yes.
lot of people get shot in this entire
It was
escapade.
pure mayhem, and I'm so happy that Anne didn't get shot, but I still don't understand how she honestly didn't. And then
I have
again,
no
I'm
idea.
just like, thank goodness this guy wasn't totally there because he had so many opportunities. And I'm pretty sure that same year someone tried to assassinate the queen and got somewhat close too. It's
Well, the thing
really
is
giving better
Well, the thing
security.
is, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that this guy wasn't looking to assassinate Anne as much as he was hoping to kidnap her and and like he had a
Money.
ransom note that they found and got
Yeah.
money. So he definitely didn't want to hurt her. I don't think he anticipated how much she was going to fight back and be able in that stressful situation to think 2 steps ahead of if I fall out of this car on the other side, he'll run around to see the commotion, be a little distracted. I'll get back in the car before he can get me in a ball gown.
Well, and that's what's so so I'm reading some of these quotes from her, and I love Anne loves to curse, and I truly love this about her
I do like that.
because again, in the mayhem of how the hell did was this allowed to happen? At one point, they're literally saying that the kidnapper is having a conversation with Anne, pleading for her to get out of the car so he can take her. And she's like, what does she say? She says, bloody likely. AKA fucking likely. Okay.
And this man has a
Like,
gun. You have seen
he has
him
a
shoot
gun
someone, and you're gonna
multiple
sass
times.
the guy with a gun?
And like, and then Captain Phillips is just like, I was frightened. I won't mind admitting it. Well, Anne's just like, I wasn't frightened. I was pissed. He ripped my dress. Like,
Yeah,
it's
get
just
out of here. I was
so
trying to go home.
like this guy was so chill. It's so funny. But yeah, not funny, but serious. But again, like I really do hope they got better security after that because it's giving you guys aren't that good.
No, they definitely I remember reading some of the stuff was an overhaul of security, but also the feeling that the royal family didn't wanna feel so far removed from the people that the people don't have access to them because that kind of distance can create an apathy for the monarchy. So I did read there was some interesting follow-up about procedures and all that.
And which is so interesting because they did struggle with that then because it's you think about the documentary that got pulled and now that you see that documentary, you're like, why would this get pulled? It's kind of boring. It's just them like doing mundane things.
Oh, yeah, their reality TV show.
Really, like exactly. I feel like that's the only reason to pull it, but they were like, it was just too intimate. I was like, really, it's just boring. But
Yeah.
then it's like, well, they don't want to shake hands. They're not going to hug people. They're not going to kiss babies. It makes sense while they're like, well, we'll just leave ourselves kind of open and very vulnerable to the public. So at least they can see us and get that photo and wave at us on the mall. But now it's like they can hug and kiss babies. So I feel like they can show that personal and more intimacy without having to be open kidnapping tips like that, or someone riding up on stage with a gun when the King of England or the future King of England is on there giving a speech. Like, I cannot
Yeah.
imagine that happening with William today. And let's hope it never does. But it's all, yes, very interesting. And I will say, too, with Anne, when it comes to her feminism, like you said, it also makes sense because of the time period she came from that she wants to benefit from the things like feminism, but would never call herself one, and most likely brushes off feminism as people just who hate men. you know,
Yeah.
and it makes sense. She's very much always given, I'm not like the other girls. And I will say she isn't in many ways when you're talking about the princesses that came before her and, were with her then and followed her, but she definitely does in a way, I'm better than you because I'm not like other girls, and I wanna be one of the boys.
God, I
So
really still see blank space for her. I'm really, like, kinda thinking about it.
right?
I
I
really
feel
feel
like
that
Blank
for
Space
her.
is good, yeah, because it's like it's such a fun, catchy song, but it's like the more you listen to it, it's like, "This is try hard."
It's try hard, but it's also, like it's also kinda a little dark, which
Yes,
works, I
that's
think.
true. She's a little dark, like I said, her little tidbits when she's finally like, "I've been a fence sitter my whole life," or, "I'm not your typical princess, they don't like me because of that." I'm just like, "Ow, honey, I hope you
Yeah.
therapy, please, please."
Never, never. Let's be
Just
honest.
500 engagements a year, don't worry.
That's all, that's all. Yeah, this is honestly I've learned so much. I really didn't have a grasp on Anne at all, and this really painted a better picture of how I mean, as much as we can know about her, as much
Yes.
as it as is put out there in the media, obviously, there's an idea of the front stage and the backstage, the monarchy, what they put forth, what they conceal, but this has been a
Yeah.
very interesting look in her, and you really see the way in which she is, like you said, that kind of mainstay from another generation, which is kind of the
Yes.
last of her breed, to be honest. I mean, she really
He
is
is
the
the
last
last of the
one.
bygone era. Yeah,
Yep.
the last
Yep.
of the bygone era for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I
So yeah,
mean, and thank
this was
goodness.
yeah, this was awesome. This was I love these Patreon again, these Patreons are so much work, but they are so much fun to get
They're
into and
so
dig into old
fun.
articles. I mean, we have the British newspaper archives. We are not playing over here,
They're
okay?
so much fun, you
Isn't it
guys. They're
amazing?
so fun. I'm just, like,
Don't you
bookmarking all these articles, like, "Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so
yeah."
fun. It's the best resource ever, I have to be
It's
honest. But yeah, we'll
yes.
make sure to have a poll about who the next person will be for August. So definitely check it out there.
Yes.
And thank you again, all of you, for your support. We
Oh,
appreciate it so, so much. Yes, Alex.
sorry, and one more thing, I'm definitely too throughout the week and weekend, I'm gonna be traveling on Friday, but throughout the weekend excuse me, I am going to be posting just like blurbs that we quoted
Love
on
it.
here. I'm definitely going to be putting up that interview because I think if you guys want to just see Anne's
I think
personality in
that's a
action,
yeah,
yeah,
I
it'll be
do.
really good. So, yeah, I'll definitely be popping up that kind of stuff on the Patreon throughout the weekend and week just so we have more context to all of this and get into it and some of the stuff that we didn't get into.
That sounds awesome. And of course, we will include any links in the show notes so that you guys can read them, including snippets from the British newspaper archive since we can't link to those. But yeah,
Yes.
until next time,
Pinkies
pinkies up,
up.
bloody win.
Bye.